The laughter cut through Clara Monroe like a blade sharper than any winter wind. Standing on that dusty platform in Red Bluff, Montana, her carefully pressed blue dress now wrinkled from 3 days of travel, she watched the man who'd promised her forever double over in cruel amusement. "Did you really think I'd marry you?" Albert's words echoed across the station. But what Clara didn't know was that a lone cowboy was watching from the shadows, about to change everything. Stay with me, friends, and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The spring of 1883 arrived late to Montana territory, but Clara Monroe didn't mind the lingering cold. She pressed her face against the train window, watching the landscape transform from the gentle hills of Missouri to the raw, untamed beauty of the West. Each mile that passed beneath the wheels of the Northern Pacific Railroad carried her further from everything she'd ever known and closer to what she believed would be her new life. "Red Bluff, next stop," the conductor called out, his voice barely audible over the screech of brakes and the hiss of steam. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she smoothed her best dress, a pale blue cotton with delicate lace at the collar that her mother had helped her sew specifically for this moment. She'd sold everything to afford this journey. Her grandmother's silver brush set the small plot of land her father had left her, even the rocking chair her mother had nursed her in as a baby. All of it converted to cash, then converted to hope, then converted to this single train ticket that would carry her to Albert Morrison. She pulled his latest letter from her reticule, though she'd memorized every word weeks ago. His handwriting was bold and confident, just like the man himself seemed to be through his words. "My dearest Clara Sus," it began. "The days grow longer as I await your arrival. I've prepared everything for our life together. The house needs a woman's touch, but it's sturdy and warm. The ranch is small but profitable. I promise you'll want for nothing least of all, love. Yours eternally, Albert." 6 months of correspondence had led to this moment. 6 months since she'd answered his advertisement in the Matrimonial Times, one of dozens of lonely men seeking wives to join them in the frontier. But Albert's letters had stood apart. He wrote of poetry and sunsets of dreams bigger than the Montana sky, of a loneliness that echoed her own. The train lurched to a stop, and Clara's reflection caught in the window. Wide brown eyes, auburn hair carefully pinned despite the journey, cheeks flushed with anticipation, and just a touch of fear. At 26, she was considered well past marrying age back in Independence, Missouri. The war between the states had taken so many young men, including her fiancé Thomas, who died at Gettysburg before they could wed. She'd spent the following years caring for her ailing mother, watching her friends marry the few men who returned until she was left alone with nothing but a quiet house and quieter prospects. "Ma'am," the porter appeared beside her. "This is your stop." Clara stood on unsteady legs, gathering her carpetbag and the small trunk that contained everything she now owned in the world. The porter helped her down onto the platform, and the moment her boots touched Montana soil, she felt the weight of her decision. The station was busier than she'd expected. Cowboys lounged against the walls, their spurs catching the afternoon sun. Merchants loaded wagons with supplies. Women in calico dresses hurried past with baskets on their arms. And there, standing near the station house, was a group of well-dressed men, all seeming to wait for something or someone. Clara's eyes searched for Albert. He'd promised to wear a red kerchief so she'd recognize him, though he'd sent a small photograph that she kept pressed against her heart. She spotted the red fabric immediately worn by a tall man with sandy hair and a confident stance. Her breath caught. He was even more handsome than his photograph suggested. She took a step forward, then another, her heart singing despite her nervousness. This was it, the moment her new life would begin. But as she approached, she noticed something odd. The men around Albert were nudging each other, exchanging glances, some trying to suppress smiles. "Albert?" she called softly when she was close enough. He turned, and his blue eyes swept over her from head to toe. For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then, incredibly, his mouth twisted into a smirk. "Well, well," he said loudly, addressing his companions more than her. "She actually came." The words hit Clara like cold water, but she pressed forward, confusion clouding her features. "Of course I came. We're to be married. You sent for me." And that's when it happened, the laughter. It started with Albert, a low chuckle that built into full-throated guffaws. His friends joined in their amusement, echoing across the platform. Other travelers turned to stare, and Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. though she didn't yet understand the joke. Married, Albert wheezed between laughs. To you. Oh, that's rich. That's truly rich. I don't understand, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible above their mirth. Your letters. You said you loved me. You said you'd prepared a home. The letters. One of Albert's friends, a portly man with a waxed mustache, slapped his knee. Tell her about the letters, Morrison. Albert wiped tears from his eyes, his handsome face twisted with cruel amusement. It was a bet, sweetheart. Just a simple wager between gentlemen. $20 said I couldn't get some desperate spinster to travel all the way to Montana Territory believing she'd found love. Looks like I'm $20 richer. The carpetbag slipped from Clara's numb fingers, hitting the platform with a dull thud. Around her the laughter continued, but it seemed to come from very far away. She was vaguely aware of other sounds, a woman gasping in sympathy, someone muttering about shameful behavior, but mostly she heard the rushing of blood in her ears and the sound of her own heart breaking. You wrote those letters as a joke. Her voice came out strange and hollow. Well, not all of them, Albert admitted with mock thoughtfulness. The first few, certainly. But then Tom here, he gestured to the mustachioed man, he wrote that beautiful one about the sunset, and Charlie contributed that bit about poetry. It was a group effort, really. We had such fun with it. But I sold everything, so Clara said, the full weight of her situation beginning to settle on her shoulders like a yoke. I have nothing left. No home to return to. No family. I sold everything because you said, I said what you wanted to hear, Albert interrupted, his voice turning cold. That's what all you marriage-minded females want, isn't it? Pretty words and promises. Well, you got them. Consider it a lesson learned. Clara stood perfectly still, feeling as if she'd turned to stone. She was dimly aware that she should cry, should scream, should do something, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She could only stand there, the subject of sport, while the crowd grew larger and the whispers grew louder. That's enough. The voice came from behind her, deep and steady like distant thunder. Clara didn't turn, couldn't turn, but she heard boots on wood, slow and deliberate, and then a man stepped past her to stand between her and Albert's group. He was tall, though not remarkably so, with broad shoulders that suggested years of hard work rather than inherited size. His clothes were simple, worn leather chaps over denim, a plain cotton shirt, a battered hat that had seen better decades. When he pushed that hat back slightly, Clara glimpsed dark hair and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wasn't handsome in the polished way Albert was. His face was weathered, marked by sun and wind, with a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. But there was something solid about him, something real. This doesn't concern you, Ro, Albert said, though some of the mirth had left his voice. Seems to me it concerns anyone with a shred of decency, the man Ro replied. His voice never rose, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone. You've had your fun. Now move along. Or what? Tom, the mustachioed friend, stepped forward. You'll defend her honor. She doesn't have any left to defend. Coming out here alone chasing after a man she's never met? He never finished the sentence. Ro's fist connected with Tom's jaw in a movement so quick Clara almost missed it. Tom crumpled to the platform, clutching his face and moaning. Anyone else want to discuss the lady's honor? Ro asked conversationally, as if he hadn't just laid a man out cold. Albert's group exchanged glances. They outnumbered Ro significantly, but something in his stance, relaxed yet ready, suggested that numbers might not matter much. Come on, Albert muttered, helping Tom to his feet. We've had our entertainment. He tipped his hat mockingly at Clara. Good luck, sweetheart. You're going to need it. They sauntered away, their laughter resuming once they'd put some distance between themselves and Ro. The crowd began to disperse as well, though Clara caught plenty of pitying looks and heard more than a few whispered comments about that poor girl and those awful men. Soon it was just Clara and the stranger standing on the platform. She still hadn't moved, couldn't seem to make her body obey her commands. The stranger Ro turned to face her, and she saw his expression soften slightly. Ma'am, he said quietly, do you have somewhere to go? The question broke whatever spell had held her frozen. Clara felt her knees buckle, and she would have fallen if Ro hadn't caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. No, she whispered. I don't have anywhere. I don't have anything. I sold it all, everything, for this, for him, for a lie. Tears came then hot and humiliating, streaming down her cheeks as the full magnitude of her situation crashed over her. She was alone in a frontier town thousands of miles from home, though she had no home now with barely enough money for a few nights in a boarding house. After that, she couldn't even think about after that. Easy now. Rose set his grip on her elbow firm, but not constraining. Let's get you somewhere you can sit down proper. He guided her to a bench against the station wall, retrieved her dropped carpet bag, and somehow produced a handkerchief from his pocket. It was clean but worn with the letters SR, embroidered in one corner. Clara took it gratefully, trying to stem the flow of tears. I'm sorry, she managed between sobs. You don't need to. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed, settling onto the bench beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. You're not, but I've got eyes and I saw what happened. That was a low-down, dirty trick they played. No one deserves that. I was so stupid, Clara said bitterly, believing that someone could love me through letters, thinking I could just start over out here. Nothing stupid about hope, Rose said. It's the ones who prey on hope that are the problem. They sat in silence for a while, Clara gradually getting her tears under control. The sun was starting to sink lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if her world wasn't ending. What's your name? Rose asked eventually. Clara Monroe. Silas Rowe, he offered in return. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Oh. Clara wasn't sure what else to say. Social niceties seemed absurd given the circumstances. Miss Monroe, Silas said carefully, I know you don't know me from Adam, and you've got no reason to trust a stranger after what just happened. But my ranch has a separate bunkhouse where my seasonal hands stay when I have them. It's empty right now. You're welcome to it while you figure out your next move. Clara stared at him. Why would you offer that? He shrugged, the movement casual, but his eyes serious. Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone and desperate in a place that doesn't care if you live or die. Maybe because I was raised to help folks when they need it. Or maybe because I'd like to think that if my sister found herself in your situation, someone would offer her a hand up. You have a sister. Had, he corrected quietly. Fever took her 5 years back along with my ma. I'm sorry. Life out here is hard, Silas said simply. It's harder alone. I'm not asking anything from you, Miss Monroe. Just offering a roof and some time to think. Mrs. Patterson, she's the widow who runs the general store. She's always looking for help. Might be she could use an extra pair of hands, give you a way to earn some money while you decide what comes next. Clara studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. But his expression was open honest in a way that Albert's had never been, even in his photographs. I don't want charity, she said carefully. Good, because I'm not offering any. That bunkhouse needs cleaning something fierce, and I can't cook worth a damn. You help out some while you're staying, we'll call it even. It wasn't ideal. Clara knew she should probably try to find a respectable boarding house, maintain propriety. But propriety hadn't saved her from humiliation, and she had limited funds. This man had defended her when he didn't have to, and something in her gut, the same instinct that had apparently failed her with Albert, said she could trust him. All right, she said softly. Just for a few days until I can make arrangements. Silas nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused, working man's hands, but his grip was careful, as if he was aware of his own strength and consciously gentling it. My wagon's just over here, he said, taking her trunk without being asked. It's not fancy, but it'll get us there. The wagon was indeed not fancy, a practical vehicle meant for hauling supplies and feed more than passengers. But Silas helped her up onto the bench seat with the same careful courtesy he'd shown throughout their interaction, making sure her skirts were arranged properly before climbing up himself. As they pulled away from the station, Clara caught sight of Albert and his friends outside one of the saloon's drinks, already in hand, toasting their successful prank. Her stomach turned, and she looked away. Don't give them any more of your thoughts, Silas said quietly, noticing the direction of her gaze. They're not worth it. I trusted him, Clara said, the words bitter on her tongue. I thought his letters were beautiful, romantic. I thought he was lonely like me. Men like that don't know what loneliness is, Silas replied, his hand steady on the reins as they left the town behind. They've got their friends, their jokes, their money. They make sport of others because they're empty inside and don't even know it. The road north was rough, and Clara had to grip the seat to keep from bouncing off. The landscape opened up around them, vast stretches of grassland dotted with patches of snow that hadn't quite melted yet, mountains rising in the distance like purple shadows against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Clara said, almost surprised to find she could still notice beauty after the day's events. "It is," Silas agreed. "Hard and unforgiving sometimes, but beautiful. Been here 8 years now, and it still takes my breath away some mornings." 8 years. "Where are you from originally?" "Ohio originally, but I fought in the war, and after, I couldn't seem to settle back into civilized life. Too many ghosts. Too much noise. Came out here looking for quiet and space." "Did you find it?" He glanced at her, and she thought she saw the hint of a smile. "Found quiet, sure enough, maybe too much of it sometimes." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of horse hooves. Clara found it surprisingly soothing after the chaos at the station. She studied the landscape, trying to imagine making a life here. It seemed impossible now with her plans in ruins, but something about the vastness of it suggested that anything could be started over, rebuilt, reimagined. "There," Silas said, eventually pointing ahead. "That's my place." Clara looked and saw a modest but well-maintained ranch nestled in a natural valley. The main house was single-story built of logs with a stone chimney that was already releasing smoke into the evening air. A barn stood nearby, sturdy and practical, and she could see a chicken coop and what looked like a vegetable garden still dormant from winter. The bunkhouse Silas had mentioned sat a respectful distance from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for propriety. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it," Silas confirmed. "Had some help with the barn. A man can't raise a barn alone no matter how stubborn he is." As they pulled up to the house, a dog came bounding out, a mixed breed with more enthusiasm than sense, barking joyfully at Silas's return. "That's Duke," Silas said. "He's got no manners, but he's harmless." Duke proved this by immediately trying to jump up on Clara when Silas helped her down from the wagon, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end moved with it. "Duke down," Silas commanded, and the dog reluctantly obeyed, though he continued to vibrate with excitement. "He doesn't see many visitors," Silas explained apologetically. He led her to the bunkhouse first, lighting a lantern he pulled from the wagon. The space was indeed dusty, but surprisingly well-appointed. 2 sets of bunk beds, a small table with chairs, a pot-bellied stove for heat, and even a shelf with a few books. "It's not much," Silas said, seeming suddenly self-conscious, "but it's warm and dry. There's a pump out back for water, and the outhouse is that way." He gestured vaguely. "I'll bring some firewood over, get the stove going." "It's perfect," Clara said, meaning it. After expecting to spend her first night in Montana as a new bride, even this simple shelter felt like an unexpected grace. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe. I don't know how to repay your kindness." "No repayment needed," he said firmly. "And call me Silas. We don't stand much on formality out here." He left to get the firewood, and Clara sat on one of the lower bunks, finally allowing herself to truly feel the exhaustion of the day. She'd woken that morning in a hotel in Billings, full of anticipation for her new life. Now she was a charity case dependent on the kindness of a stranger with no clear path forward. But as Silas returned and efficiently built a fire in the stove, as warmth began to spread through the small space, as Duke curled up on the floor near her feet, as if they'd been friends forever, Clara felt something she hadn't expected, a tiny spark of hope. Not the grand romantic hope she'd carried on the train, but something smaller and perhaps more real. "There's some beans and cornbread from last night in the main house," Silas said once the fire was established. "Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to it." Clara's stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "That sounds wonderful." The main house was much like Silas himself, plain but solid, everything functional and well-maintained. The furniture was handmade but skillfully done, the floors swept clean, dishes washed and stacked neatly. But there were no curtains on the windows, No tablecloth on the table, no pictures on the walls. It was a house that served its purpose, but had never been a home. Silas heated the beans and sliced the cornbread, his movements efficient in the familiar space. Clara sat at the table, watching him work and trying to reconcile this quiet, kind man with the violence she'd seen him capable of at the station. "You hit that man," she said suddenly. Silas paused in his stirring. "I did." "Why?" He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "My pa taught me never to raise a hand in anger, but he also taught me that sometimes a man needs to be reminded that his actions have consequences. Tom had that reminder coming." "You could have been hurt. There were 5 of them." Silas shrugged and returned to the beans. "Maybe. But they're town men, soft. They might have taken me eventually, but it would have cost them, and they knew it. Men like that don't like paying costs." He set a plate in front of her, the beans steaming, the cornbread golden, even though it was a day old. Clara took a bite and nearly moaned. After the emotion of the day, even this simple food tasted like a feast. "This is delicious," she said. "You're either being kind or you're hungrier than you know." Silas replied, but she caught a pleased look on his face. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Clara asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" "A successful ranch, your own land, surely you could find a wife if you wanted one." Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Had a fiancée once. Back in Ohio before the war. Sweet girl named Margaret. Told her I'd marry her when I got back." He paused. "But the man who came back wasn't the one who'd left. I'd seen too much done too much. I couldn't saddle her with what I'd become. So I left. Came here. Built this place. Do you regret it?" "Some days," he admitted. "But Margaret married a shopkeeper 2 years after I left. Has 3 children now. She got the life she deserved with a whole man instead of whatever pieces the war left of me." Clara reached across the table impulsively, touching his hand briefly. "You seem pretty whole to me." He looked at their hands, hers small and pale, his large and tanned, then gently pulled away. "You've had a long day, Miss Clara. Best get some rest." She knew a dismissal when she heard one, but it was gently done. She rose, taking her plate to the basin like she'd seen him do. "Leave it," he said. "I'll take care of it." "I don't want to—" "Tomorrow, he interrupted softly. "Tomorrow you can start earning your keep if that's what you need. Tonight just rest." Clara nodded suddenly, feeling every mile of her journey, every tear she'd shed, every shattered dream weighing on her shoulders. "Good night, Silas, and thank you for everything." "Good night, Miss Clara." She made her way back to the bunkhouse, Duke trailing behind her until Silas called him back. The fire in the stove had warmed the small space nicely, and someone Silas obviously had left a bucket of fresh water by the door while they ate. Clara sat on the bunk and finally allowed herself to think about her situation. She was ruined by any societal standard. An unmarried woman who'd traveled across the country to meet a man now living on his property, even in the separate bunkhouse, even with nothing improper happening, her reputation was destroyed. Not that it mattered much. She had no family to shame, no home to return to. She pulled out the packet of Albert's letters from her bag, intending to burn them in the stove. But something made her hesitate. She opened one at random, reading the flowing script that had once made her heart race. "My darling Clara, I dreamt of you last night. We were walking through a field of wildflowers, your hand in mine, your laughter like music. I wake each morning hoping this will be the day you arrive, the day my real life begins." Now knowing the truth, she could see the mockery in every word. How they must have laughed, Albert and his friends, thinking up romantic phrases, each trying to outdo the other in flowery sentiment. How pathetic she must have seemed responding with her own earnest letters, pouring out her heart to men who saw her as nothing but a joke. She fed the letters to the stove one by one, watching Albert's lies turn to ash. With each letter that burned, she felt something inside her harden. She'd been a fool, yes, but she wouldn't be one again. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. The last letter was the first one she'd received, the one that had started it all. She almost threw it in with the others, but stopped. This one she'd keep. She decided, a reminder of the cost of believing in fairy tales. Outside, she heard the low murmur of Silas's voice, probably talking to Duke. The sound was oddly comforting. He'd asked nothing of her, expected nothing, just offered help when she desperately needed it. But Clara knew better now than to mistake kindness for anything more. She'd learned that lesson at the train station, learned it hard and public and painful. She prepared for bed, washing her face with the cold water, changing into her nightgown behind the blanket she'd hung for privacy, even though she was alone. The bunk was surprisingly comfortable, the blankets clean, if rough. As she lay there listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night wind through grass, the distant howl of something wild, the settling of the building around her, Clara made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would find work, save money. Maybe eventually make it to California or Oregon, somewhere she could start over properly. She would be practical, sensible, all the things she should have been before. But even as she made these resolutions, even as she built walls around her broken heart, she couldn't quite forget the gentle way Silas had helped her from the wagon, the quiet anger in his voice when he'd confronted Albert, the simple kindness of beans and cornbread offered without expectation. Stop it, she told herself firmly. That kind of thinking was what got her here in the first place. Silas Rowe was a good man, clearly, but that didn't mean anything beyond a temporary roof over her head. She wouldn't mistake basic human decency for something more. Not again. But as sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were not of Albert's cruel laughter or the humiliation at the train station. Instead, she dreamed of steady hands on wagon reins and coffee-colored eyes that looked at her like she was a person, not a joke. She woke once in the night, disoriented, forgetting for a moment where she was. Then it all came back, the train, the laughter, the kindness of a stranger. She could hear Duke barking at something in the distance, then Silas's voice calling him back. The sound was reassuring somehow, knowing someone else was awake in the darkness. Clara pulled the blanket higher and closed her eyes again. Tomorrow she would start putting her life back together. Tomorrow she would be strong and independent and wholly self-reliant. But tonight, just for tonight, she allowed herself to feel grateful that when she'd fallen, someone had been there to catch her. The Montana wind continued its lonely song outside the bunkhouse walls, and somewhere in the main house, a good man sat by his fire, wondering what had possessed him to bring home a broken-hearted stranger, and why the empty house suddenly felt a little less empty, knowing she was near. The morning arrived with a thin frost coating the windows of the bunkhouse, and Clara woke to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere near the main house. For a moment, wrapped in the rough wool blankets, she could almost pretend she was back home in Missouri, that none of yesterday had happened. But the unfamiliar ceiling above her and the lingering smell of wood smoke from the pot-bellied stove brought reality crashing back. She dressed quickly in the cold air, choosing her second-best dress, a practical brown wool that wouldn't show dirt easily. Her best dress, the blue one she'd worn yesterday, hung on a nail, still carrying the dust of her humiliation. She couldn't bear to look at it. When she stepped outside, the morning sun was just beginning to paint the mountains gold, and the air was so crisp it made her lungs ache. Silas was already at work. She could see him moving around inside the barn, and Duke came running the moment he spotted her tail wagging enthusiastically. "Good morning to you too, Saint," she said, scratching behind his ears, grateful for the uncomplicated affection. Silas emerged from the barn carrying a bucket of fresh milk, and Clara was struck again by how different he was from Albert. Where Albert had been polished and deliberately charming, Silas seemed unconscious of himself, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin and his own land. "Morning," he said simply. "Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you. The bunkhouse is very comfortable. There's coffee on the stove and biscuits from this morning. Help yourself." Clara followed him into the house where indeed coffee bubbled on the stove and a plate of biscuits sat on the table still warm. She poured herself a cup and wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. "I thought I might go into town today," she said carefully. "Speak to Mrs. Patterson about work." Silas nodded, buttering a biscuit. "Smart thinking. Martha Patterson's good people. She'll treat you fair." He paused, then added, "Though you might want to wait a day or two. Let the dust settle from yesterday." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course, everyone in town would know by now. The story of the foolish spinster who'd traveled across the country for a fake proposal would be the talk of every household, every saloon, every street corner. "They'll have moved on to something else soon enough," Silas said, reading her expression. "Town that size, there's always new gossip. Besides, Martha's not one to judge. She came out here as a mail-order bride herself 20 years ago. Worked out well for her until Patterson died of pneumonia 2 winters back. Oh, Clara hadn't considered that others might have similar stories, might have taken similar risks. Tell you what, Silas continued, I need supplies from town anyway. Give it 3 days, then we'll go together. Might be easier having someone with you. The kindness of it made her throat tight. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. His tone was matter-of-fact. Now you said you'd help out to earn your keep. Can you cook? Yes, quite well, actually. My mother taught me, and I kept house for her until she passed. Good. Because I can make biscuits, beans, and coffee, and that's about the extent of it. Been living on those 3 things so long, I'd about forgotten food could taste like anything else. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. I'll need to know what supplies you have. He showed her the pantry, which was well stocked with basics. Flour, salt, sugar, lard, dried beans, preserved meats, canned goods. There was even a root cellar with potatoes, onions, and turnips stored from the previous fall's harvest. This is more than enough to work with, Clara said, already planning meals in her head. It felt good to have a purpose, however small. There's a garden plot out back, Silas added. Haven't had time to tend it proper, but maybe... Well, if you're still here come planting time, maybe you'd want to put something in. The unspoken question hung between them. How long would she stay? Clara didn't have an answer. She couldn't impose on his hospitality indefinitely, but she had nowhere else to go. We'll see, she said softly. Silas left her to explore the kitchen while he returned to his work. Clara tied an apron around her waist. She found it hanging on a hook, clearly unused for years, and set about familiarizing herself with the space. Everything was clean but basic, functional, but not homey. No woman's touch had blessed this kitchen in a long time, if ever. She started with something simple for the midday meal, a pot of soup using some of the dried beans and preserved pork with onions and potatoes from the root cellar. While it simmered, she mixed dough for fresh bread, finding a satisfaction in the familiar rhythm of kneading. As she worked, she found herself watching Silas through the window. He was repairing a section of fence, his movements efficient and economical. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked, completely absorbed in the task at hand. Duke lay nearby, occasionally lifting his head to check on his master's progress. When had a man last cooked for her, Clara couldn't remember. Even Thomas, her long-dead fiancé, had never done such a thing. Men didn't cook for women. It simply wasn't done. But Silas had heated those beans for her last night without a second thought, as natural as breathing. The bread was in the oven and the soup was bubbling when Silas came in for dinner lunch. She supposed they called it out here. He stopped in the doorway, sniffing appreciatively. That smells like heaven, he said. It's just soup, Claire replied, suddenly self-conscious. But when she served it, along with thick slices of fresh bread, Silas ate with such obvious enjoyment that she couldn't help but feel pleased. He had seconds, then thirds, before finally pushing back from the table with a contented sigh. Ma'am, that's the best meal I've had in, well, probably since the last time my mother cooked for me. It's just simple food, Clara protested. Maybe so, but you've got a gift for it. That soup tastes like something tastes like care went into it. He stood reaching for his hat. I've got to check on the cattle in the far pasture. Be back before dark. After he left, Clara cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, then found herself at loose ends. She wandered back to the bunkhouse and retrieved her sewing kit, one of the few practical things she'd brought. There were holes in several of Silas's socks she'd noticed in a basket by his bed. She could mend those. She settled in the main house's front room near the window for light and began to sew. It was peaceful work, the kind that let her mind wander. She tried not to think about Albert, about the humiliation, but it kept creeping in. How many other women had those men tricked? Was she just one in a long line of desperate spinsters they'd made sport of? The sound of horses approaching made her look up. 3 riders were coming down the road toward the ranch. Her heart began to pound. What if it was Albert and his friends come to cause more trouble? But as they got closer, she saw they were older men, weathered and worn like Silas. They dismounted near the barn, and she could hear their voices carrying on the wind, though not the words. Should she go out hide? She wasn't sure what her role here was, what Silas would want her to do. Before she could decide, the front door opened and Silas entered, followed by the 3 men. He looked surprised to find her in his chair, his socks in her lap. Miss Clara. he said carefully. "These are some neighbors. Ben Watson, Carl Hendricks, and Joe Paulson. Gentlemen, this is Miss Monroe. She's staying in the bunkhouse for a spell." The men tipped their hats politely, but Clara could see the curiosity in their eyes. She knew how this looked a single woman living on a bachelor's property. Her reputation, already damaged, was now thoroughly destroyed. "Pleased to meet you," she managed. "We heard about what happened at the station yesterday, Sam," Ben Watson said bluntly. He was the oldest of the three with silver hair and kind eyes. "That was a dirty trick Morrison played. Boy needs a stronger lesson than what Silas gave him." "What's done is done," Silas said firmly. "Miss Clara doesn't need to relive it." "Actually came by to tell you Morrison and his crew are bragging about it in town," Carl said. He was younger, with a thick black beard. "Making the lady out to be—" He glanced at Clara and cleared his throat. "Well, saying things that aren't fit to repeat." Clara felt her face burn. Of course, Albert would make it worse, would paint her as desperate, pathetic, probably worse things she couldn't imagine. "Also came to say," Joe added quietly, "that Martha Patterson put them straight, told them exactly what she thought of grown men playing such games. Near about took Morrison's head off with a rolling pin when he laughed about it in her store." "Martha doesn't suffer fools," Ben agreed. "She's letting everyone know the truth of it, that Miss Monroe here was responding to what she thought was an honest proposal, and that any decent person would have done the same." "Doesn't matter," Clara said quietly. "The damage is done. No one will want to associate with me now." "You might be surprised," Carl said. "Town's full of folks who came here looking for second chances. Most of us got stories we'd rather forget." They stayed for coffee. Clara insisted on serving them, needing something to do with her hands. The men were polite, careful with their language around her, and she realized they were trying in their rough way to make her feel welcome. After they left, Silas stood awkwardly in the front room. "I'm sorry about that. Should have warned you I might have visitors." "It's your home," Clara said. "You don't need to apologize for having guests. Still, I know this isn't what you signed up for, being the subject of gossip." Clara gave a bitter laugh. "I signed up to be a wife. Instead, I'm a cautionary tale." "You're a survivor," Silas corrected. "That's something to be proud of." That evening, Clara made a proper dinner: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans she'd found canned in the pantry. Silas's expression when he sat down to the meal was almost comical. "This is too much," he said. "You don't need to go to this trouble." "I like cooking," Clara admitted. "Makes me feel useful. Besides your skin and bones, when's the last time you had a proper meal?" "Can't recall," he said honestly, then tucked into the food with enthusiasm. After dinner, they sat by the fire, Silas in his chair, Clara in the one she'd claimed for sewing. It was oddly domestic, comfortable in a way that surprised her. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said suddenly. "Sure." "Why did you really offer to help me? And don't say Christian charity. There's more to it than that." Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "You ever see a horse that's been broke wrong? Beaten down until there's no spirit left, just fear?" "Yes." "Yesterday at the station you looked like that, like someone had taken something bright and tried to crush it out of you. I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand them laughing while you stood there trying to hold yourself together." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I felt crushed." "But you're not," Silas said, looking at her now. "You're here, you're cooking, you're planning. That's not crushed. That's strong." "I don't feel strong." "Strongest people rarely do." They lapsed into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way the firelight played across his weathered features. He wasn't handsome, not in the conventional sense, but there was something solid about him, something real that Albert's polished good looks had lacked. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "Haven't you learned your lesson?" "I should go," she said, standing abruptly. "Thank you for dinner. I mean, for letting me cook dinner. I know what you mean," Silas said gently. "Good night, Miss Clara." "Good night." The next 3 days fell into a routine. Clara cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and organized the chaos of Silas's bachelor household. Silas worked his ranch, coming in for meals with appreciation that never seemed to wane, no matter what she put in front of him. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the comfortable silence. On the second day, she ventured into the garden plot Silas had mentioned. It was overgrown with dead weeds from the previous year, but she could see the potential. She spent the afternoon clearing it, her hands in the dirt, planning what she would plant if she was still here come spring properly. "You don't have to do that," Silas said when he found her. "I want to. I had a garden back home. I miss it." He helped her clear the rest, working beside her in companionable quiet. When they finished dirty and tired, he smiled a real smile that transformed his face. "Haven't seen that plot look so good in years," he said. "It needs manure," Clara said practically, "and the fence needs fixing to keep the rabbits out." "I'll get on that," he promised, and she realized she'd been making plans like she intended to stay. The thought frightened her. On the third evening, as promised, Silas announced they'd go to town the next day. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. "No," Clara admitted, "but I can't hide forever." That night she barely slept. What would people say? How would they look at her? She knew she had to face it eventually, but the thought made her stomach churn. Morning came too soon. Clara dressed in her best remaining dress, a green wool that brought out the color in her eyes, though she doubted anyone would be looking at her eyes. She pinned her hair carefully, trying to look respectable, though she knew that ship had sailed. Silas had cleaned himself up too, she noticed. He'd shaved, his hair was combed, and he wore what was clearly his town shirt, less worn than his work clothes. The effort he'd made for her sake touched her. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." The ride to town was quiet. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, and Silas must have noticed because he said, "It won't be as bad as you're thinking." "How do you know what I'm thinking?" "Your face is like an open book. Every worry you've got is written there plain as day." "That's reassuring," Clara said dryly. "Actually it is," Silas replied. "Means you're honest, can't hide what you're feeling. That's rare out here." As they entered Red Bluff, Clara could feel eyes on them immediately. People stopped their conversations to stare, and she heard whispers following in their wake. She kept her eyes forward, her chin up, though she wanted nothing more than to hide. Silas pulled up in front of Patterson's general store. "I'll be right here," he said. "Take your time." Clara climbed down and walked into the store on shaking legs. A bell chimed as she entered, and a woman behind the counter looked up. Martha Patterson, presumably. She was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were kind. "You must be Miss Monroe," she said without preamble. "I've been expecting you." "Mrs. Patterson, I was wondering if you might have any work available." "Of course I do," Martha interrupted. "Can't manage this whole store by myself, and my back isn't what it used to be. Can you read and write?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do figures?" "Yes." "Then you're hired. $1 a day, 6 days a week. Sundays off for church if you're inclined. You can start Monday if that suits." Clara blinked, surprised by the swift decision. "Don't you want references or eek?" "Honey," Martha said, coming around the counter to take Clara's hands. "Any woman brave enough to travel across this country for love and strong enough to hold her head up after what those bastards, pardon my language, did to you is someone I want working for me. Besides, Silas Rowe doesn't take in strays. If he's vouching for you, that's reference enough." We're not," Clara stammered. "I know exactly what you're not," Martha said with a knowing smile. "That man's been alone too long, and from what I hear, you could use a friend. Nothing wrong with that." The bell chimed again, and Clara's blood ran cold as Albert Morrison walked in, flanked by 2 of his friends. His eyes landed on her immediately, and his smirk made her stomach turn. "Well, well, the blushing bride. How's married life treating you?" "You're not welcome in my store," Martha said sharply. "Now, Martha, I'm a paying customer." "Not anymore, you're not. Get out." "Come now, I was just having some fun with Miss Monroe here. No harm done." "No harm." Clara found her voice anger overriding her humiliation. "You convinced me to sell everything I owned to travel thousands of miles for your amusement. You destroyed my life for a $20 bet." Albert shrugged. "Not my fault you were desperate enough to believe it." The door chimed again, and Silas entered. He took in the scene with one glance and moved to stand beside Clara, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. Morrison, he said quietly. You've had your say. Move along. Or what row you'll hit me like you hit Tom. There are witnesses here. Witnesses who saw you harassing a lady after Mrs. Patterson asked you to leave her establishment, Silas replied calmly. Judge Morgan's not going to look kindly on that. Albert's face reddened. She's no lady. Any woman who'd travel across the country to marry a stranger. He never finished the sentence. This time it was Martha who acted, bringing her heavy rolling pin down on Albert's hand where it rested on her counter. He yelped, jerking back. You ever speak about Miss Monroe again in my store or anywhere else I might hear about it, and you'll lose more than the use of that hand for a few days, Martha said sweetly. Now get out before I decide to aim for your head. Albert and his friends retreated, but not before Albert shot Clara a look of pure venom. She knew she'd made an enemy, but found she didn't care. She was too tired of being afraid. Thank you, she said to Martha. No thanks needed. Been wanting to do that for years. Boy's had it coming since he was knee-high. Clara completed her arrangement with Martha, agreeing to start work on Monday. When she emerged from the store, she found Silas loading supplies into the wagon, acting as if the confrontation hadn't happened. All settled? He asked. Yes, I start Monday. Good. Martha will treat you fair. They made a few more stops, the feed store, the blacksmith, and everywhere Clara felt eyes on them. Some were curious, some pitying, but a surprising number were sympathetic. Several women nodded to her small gestures of solidarity that meant more than they could know. As they were preparing to leave, an elegant woman in an expensive dress approached them. Clara recognized her as the banker's wife, one of the town's social leaders. Miss Monroe, she said formally, I wanted to express my sympathy for your unfortunate situation. Thank you, Clara said carefully, not sure where this was going. However, the woman continued, I feel I should warn you that your current arrangement is highly improper. Living on Mr. Rowe's property without benefit of marriage or proper chaperoning. Mrs. Hartley, Silas interrupted, his voice hard. Miss Monroe is staying in my bunkhouse while she gets on her feet. There's nothing improper about Christian charity. Nevertheless, people will talk. People are already talking, Clara said, finding her spine. They've been talking since I stepped off that train. At least now they're talking about my supposed impropriety rather than my humiliation. I'd call that an improvement. Mrs. Hartley huffed and swept away, but Clara caught several approving looks from other women who'd overheard. On the ride home, Clara felt exhausted but oddly victorious. She'd faced the town, faced Albert, and survived. You did good, Silas said simply. I wanted to run, but you didn't. That's what counts. That evening, as Clara served dinner, a venison stew she'd had simmering all day, she found herself really looking at Silas for the first time. Not comparing him to Albert or Thomas or anyone else, but seeing him as he was. The steady way he moved, the careful way he spoke, the kindness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. Why haven't you married? She asked suddenly, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's all right, Silas said. Told you about Margaret. After that, just never found anyone who... He paused, searching for words. Never found anyone who made me want to try again. Building something with someone trusting them with everything that's not a small thing. No, Clara agreed softly. It's not. What about you? Before Albert, I mean. You mentioned someone who died in the war. Thomas. We were engaged. He was sweet young. We both were. I'm not sure it would have worked honestly. We wanted such different things. He wanted adventure to see the world. I wanted a home, children, roots. She smiled sadly. I suppose I got adventure after all, just not the kind I expected. Adventure's overrated, Silas said. Give me a quiet life any day. After dinner, instead of retiring to the bunkhouse immediately, Clara lingered. They sat by the fire and Silas pulled out a worn book, Shakespeare, she saw with surprise. You read Shakespeare? My mother was a school teacher before she married, made sure all of us could read and appreciate good writing. This was hers. Would you read some? He looked surprised but pleased. Any preference? You choose. He opened to a marked page and began to read in his deep, steady voice. It was from Much Ado About Nothing, the scene where Benedict and Beatrice finally admit their love. His reading was unpracticed but sincere, and Clara found herself transported. When he finished the scene, they sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Clara stood to leave. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for everything." "You don't need to keep thanking me." "Yes, I do. You gave me hope when I had none. That's not a small thing either." She left before he could respond, but she thought she saw something warm in his eyes, something that made her heart beat faster despite all her resolutions to be sensible. Back in the bunkhouse, Clara sat on her bed and thought about the day. She'd expected it to be horrible, and parts of it had been, but she'd also found unexpected allies, unexpected strength, and in Silas's quiet presence, unexpected comfort. She thought about his hands holding that book, work-roughened but gentle with the pages, the way his voice had softened over the poetry, the way he'd stood beside her in the store, not fighting her battles for her, but letting her know she wasn't fighting alone. No, she told herself firmly. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Silas was a good man offering help to someone in need. That was all. She wouldn't read more into it, wouldn't build another fantasy that would only lead to heartbreak. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't quite forget the way he'd said her name, Miss Clara, like it was something precious, something worth protecting. The days settled into a rhythm. Monday through Saturday, Clara worked at Patterson's store, learning the inventory, helping customers, keeping the books. Martha was a good employer, patient and fair, and Clara found she enjoyed the work. It kept her mind busy and gave her a sense of purpose. In the evening, she returned to the ranch and cooked dinner for Silas. They ate together, talked about their days, then sat by the fire. Sometimes he read to her. Sometimes they just enjoyed the quiet. It was domestic in a way that should have felt dangerous given her recent heartbreak, but instead felt healing. Sundays were different. Clara would pack a lunch, and she and Silas would ride out to different parts of his land. He showed her the creek where he watered his cattle, the grove of cottonwoods where deer gathered at dawn, the rise where you could see for 50 miles on a clear day. "It's beautiful," she said one Sunday, standing on that rise with the wind whipping her hair. "It's home," Silas said simply, but he was looking at her when he said it. 3 weeks passed this way. Clara's small savings from her work began to accumulate. She could have afforded to move to the boarding house in town, but neither she nor Silas mentioned it. The bunkhouse had become her refuge, the ranch her sanctuary. One evening, as she was closing up the store, Albert Morrison appeared. Martha had already left, and Clara was alone. Her heart began to pound, but she kept her voice steady. "We're closed." "I'm not here to shop." He moved closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath. "I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer." "Sure about that? See, your reputation's ruined. No decent man will have you now, not after you've been living with Roe, but I might be willing to overlook that for the right price." Clara felt sick. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a business arrangement. You warm my bed when I want it, and I'll keep you comfortable. Better than being Roe's charity case." The rage that filled Clara was unlike anything she'd ever felt. "Get out." "Think about it," Albert said, reaching out to touch her cheek. Clara slapped his hand away. "I said get out." "Feisty. I like that." The door burst open and Silas stood there, having arrived to walk her home, as he'd taken to doing. He took in the scene, Albert standing too close, Clara backed against the counter, and his expression turned dangerous. "Morrison, step away from her." "Just having a friendly chat with Miss Monroe." "Didn't look friendly from where I'm standing." Albert sneered. "What are you going to do? Roe hit me again in front of the lady." "No," Silas said calmly. "I'm going to give you one chance to leave. Then I'm going to make sure you never bother Miss Clara again." Something in his tone must have penetrated Albert's whiskey-soaked brain because he backed toward the door. "This isn't over, though," he said. "Yes, it is," Clara said, finding her voice. "If you come near me again, I'll have you arrested. Judge Morgan has a daughter. I doubt he'd look kindly on a man who propositions women in such a manner." Albert left, slamming the door behind him. Clara's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Silas hadn't caught her. "Did he hurt you?" "No, just scared me." Silas's jaw was tight with controlled anger. He won't bother you again. How can you be sure? Because tomorrow I'm going to have a talk with Judge Morgan and Sheriff Watson and anyone else who needs to know what kind of man Albert Morrison really is. Clara looked up at him, his arms still around her, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just kindness anymore. This was protection, fierce and personal. "Silas," she whispered. "Don't," he said softly, releasing her and stepping back. "Don't say anything. Not now. Not when you're scared and grateful. That's not what I want." "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I want you to be safe, happy, free to make your own choices without fear or obligation. And if I choose to stay, then you stay because you want to, not because you need to." They walked home in silence, but it was charged with unspoken words, unacknowledged feelings. Clara knew she was standing on the edge of something, but after Albert, after the humiliation and heartbreak, she was terrified to take another step. That night she lay in her bunk and thought about the differences between the two men. Albert had promised her poetry and passion in letters, but delivered cruelty and humiliation in person. Silas had promised her nothing but shelter, but had delivered safety, respect, and something that might be growing into more. The next morning, true to his word, Silas went to town early. Clara didn't know what he said to whom, but Albert Morrison left Red Bluff that very day, supposedly to visit relatives in California. The general consensus was that he'd been encouraged to make the trip and not return. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said that evening. "Yes, I did. A man like that doesn't stop unless someone makes him. Thank you. Stop thanking me for doing what any decent man would do." "But you're not just any man," Clara said softly, then caught herself. "I mean, I know what you mean," Silas said, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart race. They stood there looking at each other across the kitchen table, and Clara felt the air grow thick with possibility. But then Duke barked at something outside, breaking the spell, and the moment passed. Later, sitting by the fire while Silas read from Romeo and Juliet, a terrible choice, Clara thought, given the circumstances, she found herself studying his profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he concentrated, the careful way he turned the fragile pages. She was falling for him. Despite all her resolutions, all her promises to herself to be sensible, she was falling for this quiet, steady man who read Shakespeare and defended her honor and looked at her like she was something precious. The thought terrified her. What if she was wrong again? What if she was mistaking kindness for something more? What if Silas was just being decent and she was building another fantasy that would leave her heartbroken? But then he looked up from the book, caught her staring, and smiled that rare, transformative smile that made him almost handsome. "You all right?" "Yes," she lied. He didn't look convinced, but didn't push. That was another thing about Silas, he never pushed. He was just there, solid and constant, as the mountains offering what he could without asking for anything in return. As spring truly arrived, the snow melting from all but the highest peaks, Clara found herself planning beyond the next day or week. She started the garden properly with Silas's help. They worked side by side, planting seeds that wouldn't bear fruit for months, an act of faith in the future. "You sure you want to put in all this work?" Silas asked. One day, watching her carefully place tomato seedlings she'd started in the kitchen window. "It's a big commitment, a garden." "I'm sure," Clara said, understanding they were talking about more than vegetables. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Silas, what are we doing?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I don't know. I just know that having you here feels right. The house feels less empty. The days feel less long." "I feel the same," Clara admitted. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of being wrong again. Of mistaking kindness for love. Of building something that isn't real." Silas turned to look at her, and his expression was serious. "What we have here, friendship, partnership, whatever you want to call it, it's real. It's built on daily things, small truths, not grand gestures and pretty words. That's as real as it gets." "Is that enough?" "It's more than most folks have," he said. But if you're asking if there's more, he stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm no good at this. I don't have pretty words like Morrison did. I don't want pretty words, Clara said urgently. They were all lies anyway. Then what do you want? Clara thought about it, really thought about it. Truth, steadiness, someone who will be there in the morning and the morning after that and all the mornings to come. I can offer you that, Silas said quietly. If you want it. They sat in silence as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Finally, Clara reached over and took his hand. His fingers were calloused working hands, but they held hers gently. I'm not ready, she said. Not yet. I need time to trust again to believe that this is real. Take all the time you need, Silas said. I'm not going anywhere. And Clara believed him, not because of pretty words or grand promises, but because of the steady pressure of his hand in hers, the patient way he waited for her to be ready, the quiet certainty in his voice. As they sat there, hands linked, watching the stars emerge one by one, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since stepping off that train hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had brought her to Montana, but something quieter, stronger, built on a foundation of daily kindnesses and small truths. The weeks that followed their conversation on the porch passed with a sweet tension, like the air before a summer storm. Clara continued working at Patterson's store, where Martha watched her with knowing eyes and made occasional comments about how some men were worth the wait. Silas maintained his respectful distance, never pressing, never assuming, but his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, and his face lit up each evening when she returned from town. The garden began to flourish under Clara's care, tiny green shoots pushing through the dark soil with a determination that reminded her of herself. She found herself telling the plants about her day as she weeded and watered a habit from her childhood that she'd thought lost forever. You're talking to the tomatoes again, Silas observed one evening coming up behind her as she knelt in the dirt. Clara flushed. My mother always said plants grow better when you talk to them. Makes sense, Silas said, crouching beside her. Everything grows better with attention and care. Their eyes met, and Clara knew he wasn't talking about plants. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, but then Duke came barreling through the garden chasing after a rabbit, and they both laughed as Clara tried to save her seedlings from his enthusiastic pursuit. It was these moments that were slowly healing her heart, not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but the simple domesticity of shared laughter, comfortable silences, and the steady presence of a man who asked for nothing while offering everything. One afternoon in late May, Clara was working in the store when a woman she didn't recognize entered. She was young, perhaps 22, with golden hair and a pretty face that would have been beautiful if not for the bruise darkening her left cheek. Can I help you? Clara asked gently. The woman glanced around nervously. I'm looking for work. Any kind of work. I can clean, cook, sew. I'm not the owner, Clara said, but Mrs. Patterson will be back soon. You're welcome to wait. The woman nodded and moved to stand by the window, her posture tense. Clara recognized that stance. She'd held herself the same way those first days after the train station, like she was ready to run at any moment. When Martha returned, she took one look at the woman, and her expression softened. Come on back to the storeroom, honey. We'll talk there. 20 minutes later, Martha emerged alone. Clara, I'm going to need you to watch the store for an hour, maybe 2. Of course. Is everything all right? Martha's expression was grim. That's Mrs. Samuel Harrison. Her husband drinks, and when he drinks, he uses his fists. She's finally had enough, but she needs somewhere to go. The boarding house. First place he'll look. No, she needs somewhere else, somewhere safe. Martha paused, studying Clara. How do you think Silas would feel about another temporary boarder? Clara thought about it for perhaps 2 seconds. He'll say yes. You sure? I'm sure. And she was. Whatever else she might still be uncertain about regarding Silas, she knew his character. He wouldn't turn away someone in need. When Clara explained the situation to him that evening, Silas's reaction was exactly what she'd expected. Of course she can stay. You can share the bunkhouse, make it proper for both of you. You don't even know her. I know she needs help. That's enough. That night, Clara helped Lucy Harrison, for that was her name, settle into the bunkhouse. Lucy was quiet, jumpy at every sound, but gradually relaxed as she realized she was truly safe. Your husband, Lucy said carefully as they prepared for bed. He seems like a good man. He's not my husband, Clara corrected. It's complicated. Oh, Lucy looked confused. But you live here. Clara found herself telling Lucy her story, the letters, the humiliation at the train station, Silas's kindness. Lucy listened with wide eyes. And he's never expected anything. Never, Clara said firmly. Silas isn't like that. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, My Samuel started out sweet, brought me flowers, wrote me poems. It was only after we married that he changed, or maybe he just stopped pretending. How long were you married? 2 years. 2 years of watching him turn from the man who courted me into someone I didn't recognize, or maybe into who he really was all along. Clara thought about Albert's cruel laughter, how different it had been from his romantic letters. Then she thought about Silas, consistent and steady, the same man whether he was reading Shakespeare by the fire or mucking out the barn. Some men are exactly who they appear to be, Clara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. The next morning, Samuel Harrison came looking for his wife. Clara was in the garden when she heard the horses approaching, several of them moving fast. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the type of men riding with Harrison, the same rough crowd that had sometimes associated with Albert. Silas emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, but held casually, not quite threatening, but ready. Harrison, he said calmly, what brings you out here? I'm looking for my wife, Samuel said. He was a big man, handsome in a rough way, with the telltale redness of a drinking man. Heard she might have come this way. Haven't seen her, Silas said. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Mind if we look around? I do mind, actually. This is private property. Now, see here, Ro. No, you see here. Silas interrupted, his voice still calm but with steel underneath. You're on my land without invitation. I've asked you to leave. The polite thing would be to do so. One of Samuel's companions, a rat-faced man Clara didn't recognize, spoke up. There's 5 of us, and one of you Ro. That's true, Silas acknowledged. Of course, I'm the one who knows every rock and tree on this land. I'm the one who survived 3 years of war. And I'm the one holding the rifle. He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Your choice, gentlemen. The silence stretched taut. From her position in the garden, Clara could see Lucy watching from the bunkhouse window, her face pale with fear. Finally, Samuel spat on the ground. This isn't over, Ro. It is if you're smart, Silas replied. Your wife left you Harrison. Any man worth his salt would ask himself why instead of trying to drag her back. Samuel's face turned purple with rage, but one of his companions grabbed his arm. Come on, Sam. She'll turn up eventually. They rode off, but Clara knew Silas was right. It wasn't over. Men like Samuel Harrison didn't give up easily, especially when their pride was wounded. That evening, as they all sat down to dinner, Clara, Silas, and Lucy. The atmosphere was tense. I should leave, Lucy said quietly. I'm bringing trouble to your door. Trouble was already at my door the day Clara stepped off that train, Silas said. Seems like this ranch has become a place for folks needing a fresh start. I'm all right with that. But Samuel Harrison is a coward who beats women, Silas said bluntly. I've faced worse than him. After dinner, Lucy retired early to the bunkhouse, emotionally exhausted. Clara stayed to help Silas with the dishes, working beside him in comfortable familiarity. You were brave today, she said. Just practical. Men like Harrison are all bluster. Stand up to them once firm-like, and they usually back down. And if they don't? Silas's hand stilled in the soapy water. Then I protect what's mine. The way he said it, the way his eyes met hers, made Clara's breath catch. Silas, I know you're not ready, he said quickly. I'm not trying to push, but you should know. You should know that I consider you under my protection. You and Lucy both, but especially you. Clara's heart was pounding. Why especially me? He dried his hands slowly, seeming to gather his thoughts. Because from the moment I saw you on that platform, trying so hard to hold yourself together while those bastards laughed, I knew I'd do anything to keep you from hurting like that again. Because every evening, when you come home from town, the whole house feels brighter. Because when you're working in that garden, talking to those plants, you look happy. And your happiness has become important to me, more important than maybe it should be. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Silas, Don't say anything, he interrupted gently. Not yet. Just know that I'll wait. However long it takes for you to trust again to believe that what we have is real. I'll wait. Clara did something then that surprised them both. She rose up on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, a brief, soft touch that left them both breathless. Thank you, she whispered, and fled to the bunkhouse before either of them could say anything more. Lucy was sitting up in bed, mending one of her few dresses by lamplight. Are you all right? She asked, noting Clara's flushed face. I don't know, Clara admitted, sinking onto her own bunk. I think I'm falling in love with him. That's wonderful, isn't it? Is it? The last time I thought I was in love, it was with words on paper that turned out to be lies. How do I know this is real? Lucy set aside her sewing. My Samuel was all words and promises. He could talk pretty when he wanted something, but when things got hard, when the crops failed or money was tight, his true nature showed. Your Silas? He's been tested, hasn't he? You've seen him when things are difficult. Clara thought about it. She'd seen Silas deal with Albert's cruelty, Samuel's threats, the daily challenges of ranch life. He'd been consistent throughout, steady, kind, protective, without being possessive. Yes, she said slowly. I have. And he's been the same man throughout. Yes. Then maybe that's your answer. Not the pretty words, but the consistent actions. The next few days passed quietly. Samuel Harrison didn't return, though everyone remained watchful. Lucy began to relax, incrementally helping Clara in the garden and around the house. She was a good worker and pleasant company, though occasionally Clara would catch her staring off into the distance with such sadness it made her heart ache. One afternoon, Clara returned from town to find Silas and Lucy in the yard, Silas teaching her how to shoot his old revolver. Every woman out here should know how to protect herself, he was saying as Clara approached. Lucy's hands shook as she held the weapon, but her jaw was set with determination. She fired the shot going wide, but Silas nodded encouragingly. Better. Remember, squeeze, don't pull. Clara watched them, struck by Silas's patience and Lucy's courage. These were people who'd been shaped by hardship, but not broken by it. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, the kind that made the whole house shake with each boom. Clara had always loved storms, but Lucy was terrified, curled up on her bunk with her hands over her ears. It's just noise, Clara said soothingly. Samuel always got meaner during storms, Lucy whispered. Said the thunder made his head hurt, and then he'd drink to make it stop hurting, and then… Clara held her while she cried, understanding all too well how the wrong man could ruin even nature's beauty. When the storm passed, Clara couldn't sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside, breathing in the clean, rain-washed air. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, painting everything in silver, and the world felt new and fresh. She heard the porch door of the main house open and wasn't surprised to see Silas step out. He'd probably been unable to sleep too, though, for different reasons. They stood there 20 feet apart, looking at each other in the moonlight. Then, as if pulled by an invisible string, Clara found herself walking toward him. Couldn't sleep, he asked softly when she was close enough. The storm woke me. You, same. They stood side by side, not quite touching, looking out at the rain-silvered landscape. It's beautiful, Clara said. It is, Silas agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the view. Silas, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara. They turned toward each other, and Clara saw everything in his eyes, the longing, the patience, the love he hadn't yet put into words. She reached up her hand, trembling slightly, and touched his face. His skin was rough with stubble, warm despite the cool night air. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, he said, covering her hand with his. But I'm not Albert Morrison. I'm not going anywhere. What you see is what I am, a simple rancher who reads Shakespeare and can't cook worth a damn, and who thinks you're the finest woman he's ever met. I'm not fine, Clara protested. I'm damaged and suspicious, and… You're surviving, Silas corrected. You're brave and kind, and you make the best cornbread I've ever tasted. You brought life back to this place, Clara. To me. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know how to trust again. Then don't, Silas said simply. Don't trust. Just be. Be here with me, day by day. Let time show you what words can't prove. He was right, Clara realized. Trust couldn't be forced or rushed. It had to be built slowly, carefully, one day at a time. All right, she whispered. All right. I'll be here, day by day. We'll see what grows. Silas smiled that transformative smile that made her heart skip. Like your garden. Like my garden, Clara agreed. They stood there for a while longer, hands linked, watching the clouds race across the moon. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever. It was something smaller and therefore larger in agreement to try to be patient to let something real grow between them without forcing it. When Clara finally returned to the bunkhouse, Lucy was awake. Is everything all right? Lucy asked. I think so, Clara said. I think maybe it finally is. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw a buggy approaching, driven by a well-dressed older couple she didn't recognize. Behind them rode Judge Morgan and Sheriff Watson. Silas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. Judge, Sheriff, what brings you out here? Judge Morgan, a distinguished man with silver hair and sharp eyes, climbed down from his horse. We need to speak with Mrs. Harrison. Lucy appeared in the doorway of the bunkhouse, her face pale. Has something happened to Samuel? In a manner of speaking, the judge said. He was arrested last night for killing a man in a bar fight, beat him to death with his bare hands over a card game. Lucy's knees buckled and Clara rushed to support her. The thing is, Sheriff Watson said, we've got 3 witnesses who say Harrison was talking about how he was going to come out here today and drag his wife home, and if Roe got in the way, he'd kill him too. The older couple had climbed down from their buggy, and the woman approached Lucy with gentle authority. My dear, I'm Mrs. Morgan, the judge's wife. You're safe now. That man will never hurt you again. Will he hang? Lucy whispered. Most likely he'll get life in prison, Judge Morgan said. But either way, you're free. Lucy began to sob great heaving sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. But Clara could tell they were tears of relief, not sorrow. Mrs. Morgan took charge, as women of her type often did. Now then, my dear, you'll come stay with us until you're back on your feet. I could use help with my correspondence, and you look like you have a neat hand. I couldn't impose, Lucy began. Nonsense. It's not an imposition if I'm asking. Besides, the judge is always complaining about my organizational skills. You'd be doing us a favor. As they prepared to leave, Lucy hugged Clara tightly. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You'd have done the same for me, Clara said, and meant it. After they left, Clara and Silas stood in the yard watching the buggy disappear down the road. She'll be all right, Silas said. Yes, I think she will. And you? He turned to look at her. Will you be all right? Clara considered the question. A month ago, she would have said no. She'd been broken, humiliated, lost. But now standing in the yard of this ranch that had become home beside this man who'd become everything, she found she could answer honestly. Yes, she said. I will be all right. I am all right. That evening, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Clara didn't return to the bunkhouse after dinner. Instead, she stayed in the main house, sitting beside Silas on the small sofa he'd built years ago for one person, but which somehow accommodated 2 if they sat close. He read to her from A Midsummer Night's Dream, his voice rumbling through his chest where her head rested against his shoulder. Duke lay at their feet, occasionally sighing contentedly. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, Silas read, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. Do you believe that? Clara asked. That love is blind. Silas was quiet for a moment. I think love sees truly, but it sees beyond the surface. It sees what could be, not just what is. What do you see when you look at me? He set the book aside and turned to face her fully. I see a woman who's been knocked down but not defeated. I see strength disguised as gentleness. I see someone who makes my house feel like a home just by being in it. He paused, then added softly, I see my future if you'll have me. Clara's breath caught. Silas, I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready, but I want you to know my intentions. I'm not playing games, Clara. I'm not building up to some grand revelation that'll leave you devastated. I'm just a man who loves you plain and simple. You love me? Have for weeks now. Maybe since that first night when you sat at my table trying so hard to be strong. Definitely since you started talking to those tomato plants. Despite everything, Clara laughed. That's what did it. Talking to vegetables. It was the care in it, Silas said seriously. The way you nurture things. The way you've nurtured this place, Lucy, even me, without realizing it. Clara reached up and touched his face again, marveling at how familiar it had become. I love you too, she whispered. I've been fighting it, afraid to trust it, but I do. I love your steadiness and your kindness. I love how you read Shakespeare in that rough voice of yours. I love how you treat Duke like he's people. I love how you stood up for me, for Lucy, without needing thanks or recognition. Clara, but I'm still scared, she continued. I'm terrified that I'm wrong again, that I'm seeing what I want to see instead of what's really there. Then we go slow, Silas said. We court proper-like. I'll call on you in the evenings. Take you to the church social next month. Walk you home from work. All of it in plain sight of everyone so you can see there's no deception, no hidden side to me. You do that, court me formally, even though I'm already living on your property. I do anything to make you feel safe and sure. Clara kissed him, then properly this time. Not a brief touch on the cheek, but a real kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. That wasn't very proper, Clara said, trying for lightness. No, Silas agreed, but it was perfect. They sat together until the fire burned low, talking about everything and nothing. About his childhood in Ohio, her mother's garden in Missouri, his plans for expanding the ranch, her ideas for the vegetable plot. Ordinary things, but shared with extraordinary care. When Clara finally rose to go to the bunkhouse, Silas caught her hand. Stay, he said softly. Not like that. Just stay. Sleep in the spare room. I want to know you're here, safe under my roof. It was improper. It would cause talk if anyone knew. But Clara found she didn't care. She was tired of letting other people's opinions dictate her life. All right, she said. The spare room was small but clean, with a quilted covered bed and a window that looked out over the garden. Clara changed into her nightgown and lay down, feeling strange but not uncomfortable. Through the thin walls, she could hear Silas moving around, getting ready for bed. Good night, Clara. His voice came through the wall. Good night, Silas, she called back. She fell asleep smiling, feeling safer and more at home than she had in years. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Silas trying to be quiet in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and found him attempting to make breakfast with Duke, watching hopefully for dropped food. You don't have to cook, she said from the doorway. He turned and his face lit up at the sight of her. Wanted to. You're always cooking for me. That's because I can actually cook. Clara pointed out, rescuing the eggs before they burned. They worked together to salvage breakfast, moving around each other with easy familiarity. It felt right, Clara thought, natural, like they'd been doing this for years. I should probably go back to the bunkhouse, Clara said as they ate, for propriety's sake. Probably, Silas agreed, though it seems foolish you being out there alone now that Lucy's gone. People will talk if I stay in the house. People are already talking, have been since the day you arrived. He had a point. Clara's reputation, such as it was, had been destroyed the moment she'd accepted Silas's help. Moving into the house properly wouldn't change that. What are you suggesting? She asked carefully. Silas set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. I'm suggesting we stop caring so much about what others think and focus on what we know. We know we love each other. We know we want to build a life together. Maybe we do things in the wrong order, but out here that matters less than doing them right. And what would doing them right look like? You move into the house, we live as companions, I suppose. Nothing improper. And when you're ready, when you truly believe that this is real and lasting, we get married. Could be a month, could be a year. I'll wait. Clara's heart was racing. That's a big step. It is, Silas agreed. But every day you go back to that bunkhouse feels like a step backward, like we're pretending we haven't already started building something together. He was right. They'd been building something since that first night when he'd offered her shelter. Every meal shared every evening by the fire, every comfortable silence had been another brick in the foundation of whatever this was between them. "All right," Clara said. "I'll move into the house, but—" "Separate rooms," Silas said quickly. "Everything proper except for the fact of it. And if people talk, let them. We'll know the truth." That afternoon, Clara moved her few belongings from the bunkhouse to the spare room. It didn't take long, she had so little, but Silas had cleared space in the wardrobe, put fresh flowers from her garden on the dresser, and hung new curtains at the window. "You did all this?" Clara asked, touched. "Wanted it to feel like yours," he said simply. That evening, Martha Patterson came to call ostensibly to bring Clara her pay, but really to assess the situation. "So," Martha said, settling her considerable bulk into a kitchen chair, "you've moved into the house." "I have," Clara said, chin up, ready for judgment. "Good," Martha said, surprising her. That bunkhouse was no place for a woman alone. Besides, anyone with eyes can see you two belong together. But propriety. Propriety is for places where people have the luxury of following all the rules, Martha said bluntly. "Out here we make our own rules. You're a good woman, Clara Monroe. Silas Rowe is a good man. What you build together is your business." After Martha left, Clara found Silas in the barn brushing down his horse. "Martha approves," she said. "Martha's a smart woman." Clara watched him work the sure movements of his hands, the gentle way he spoke to the animal. "Silas, thank you for the flowers, the curtains, for everything." He paused in his brushing. "You're welcome, though I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on this. On us. After everything you've been through, trusting again. I know it's not easy." "No," Clara agreed, moving closer. "It's not easy, but you make it easier. Every day, with every small kindness, every patient moment, you make it easier." Silas set down the brush and turned to her. "Clara, Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by Duke's sudden barking. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast. As he got closer, Clara recognized Ben Watson, their neighbor. "Silas," Ben called out before he'd even fully stopped. "There's trouble. Big trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Silas asked, already moving toward his rifle. "Albert Morrison's back, and he's drunk as a skunk, telling everyone in town that he's coming out here to claim what's his." Clara's blood ran cold. "What's his—" Ben looked uncomfortable. "You, ma'am. He's saying you were promised to him, that Silas stole you, and he's come to set things right." Silas's jaw tightened as he processed Ben's words. "How many men does he have with him? 4? Maybe 5. That same crowd from before, plus some new faces. They've been drinking at the saloon since noon, working themselves up to something stupid." Clara felt her hands begin to shake, remembering Albert's cruel laughter, the humiliation that still haunted her dreams. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone and defenseless on a train platform. "You should go to town," Silas said to her quietly. "Stay with Martha until this blows over." "No," Clara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I won't run from him. Not again." "Clara, this could get ugly." "It's already ugly. It's been ugly since the day he made me the butt of his joke. I won't let him drive me from my home." "Your home?" Silas asked softly, something warm flickering in his eyes despite the danger. "Yes," Clara said simply. "My home." Ben cleared his throat. "Carl and Joe are ready to ride over if you need them. Just say the word." "Tell them to come," Silas said, not taking his eyes off Clara. "We'll make our stand here if we have to." After Ben rode off, Silas began preparing. He loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, positioned ammunition where it could be easily reached. Clara watched him transform from the gentleman who read Shakespeare into someone harder, someone shaped by war. "You've done this before," she observed. "More times than I care to remember," he said grimly. "During the war, after it. Thought I'd left it behind when I came here." "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to you." Silas stopped what he was doing and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You didn't bring trouble. Morrison did. Men like him always do. They can't stand to see others happy when they're miserable inside. Through the window, Clara could see dust rising on the road. Multiple riders coming fast. Her heart began to pound, but she forced herself to stand straight. Clara, I need you to go inside, Silas said. Lock the doors, stay away from the windows. What about you? I'll be fine. I've got good cover from the porch, and Carl and Joe should be here soon. She wanted to argue, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Worry for her, not himself. So she nodded, but before going inside, she rose up and kissed him, pouring all her fear and love into that brief touch. Be careful, she whispered. Always am. Clara went inside but didn't lock the door. Instead, she retrieved the shotgun she knew Silas kept in the bedroom, loaded it with steady hands her father had trained years ago, and positioned herself where she could see the front yard through a crack in the curtains. The riders came into view, 6 of them, Albert in the lead. Even from a distance, she could see he was drunk, swaying slightly in his saddle. They stopped just outside the property line, and Albert called out in a slurred voice, "Row, send out my woman." Silas stepped onto the porch rifle, held casually, but ready. Miss Monroe isn't your woman, Morrison. Never was. She came here to marry me. She came here because you lied to her. Then you humiliated her for sport. You've got no claim on her. Albert laughed, that same cruel sound from the train station. She's damaged goods now anyway. Living with you all these weeks, everyone knows what she is, but I'm willing to overlook that. Might even marry her after all, make an honest woman of her. Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. The audacity of him to speak of making her honest when he'd been the one to destroy her reputation. You need to leave, Silas said, his voice deadly calm. Now. Or what? You'll shoot us all 6 against 1 aren't good odds, Roe. Wouldn't be too sure about that count. Carl and Joe emerged from the barn, where they'd apparently slipped in unseen, both armed. The odds had just gotten better, but Clara could see the tension in Silas's shoulders. Violence was balanced on a knife's edge. This is stupid, Morrison, one of Albert's companions said nervously. Let's go. Shut up, Albert snarled. I'm not leaving without what's mine. He dismounted clumsily, and Clara could see Silas tense. A mounted man was one thing. A man on foot could do unpredictable things. Last warning, Silas said. Albert pulled his gun, or tried to. His drunk fingers fumbled with the holster, and in that moment of vulnerability, everything might have ended peacefully. But one of his friends, younger and drunker than the rest, went for his own weapon. The crack of gunfire shattered the evening air. Clara saw Silas dive for cover as bullets splintered the porch railing. Carl and Joe returned fire from the barn, and suddenly the peaceful ranch became a battlefield. Clara didn't think. She kicked open the door and stepped onto the porch. Shotgun raised. The blast caught Albert's horse, sending it rearing and screaming. In the chaos, she pumped and fired again, this time into the air, the sound enormous and shocking. Enough, she screamed. Enough! Miraculously, the firing stopped. Everyone turned to stare at her, this woman they'd dismissed as a victim, standing there with a smoking shotgun and fury in her eyes. You... She pointed the gun at Albert, who was struggling to control his panicking horse. You worthless, pathetic excuse for a man. You think you can come here and claim me like property. You think you have any right to me after what you did. Now, Clara, Albert started. Miss Monroe to you, she snapped. And shut your mouth. I'm talking. She looked at each of his companions in turn. All of you listen well. I am not Albert Morrison's woman. I never was. I was a fool who believed his lies. Yes, but that doesn't give him or any of you any claim on me. She pumped the shotgun again, the mechanical sound loud in the silence. I choose where I go and who I'm with. And I choose to be here with Silas Rowe, a man worth 10 of any of you. Now get off our land before I forget my mother raised me to be a lady and start aiming lower than the air. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of Albert's companions, the one who'd spoken up earlier, turned his horse. Come on, Morrison, this is done. It's not done, Albert protested, but his friends were already leaving. You can't just... Yes, they can, a new voice said. Sheriff Watson rode into view, badge glinting in the late afternoon sun. Behind him came Judge Morgan and several other townsmen. Got reports of gunfire. Seems like some folks don't know when to leave well enough alone. Sheriff, this woman, Albert began. This woman is defending her home from trespassers, the sheriff interrupted. Trespassers who've been asked to leave multiple times. That about right, Silas. That's right, Silas confirmed, moving to stand beside Clara. Then I suggest you move along Morrison before I arrest you for disturbing the peace, trespassing, and attempted assault. Albert's face was purple with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he said to Clara. Yes, it is, Judge Morgan spoke up, because if you come near Miss Monroe or Mr. Rowe again, I'll personally see you prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And given your recent behavior, I doubt you'd find a sympathetic jury in this town. Defeated Albert wheeled his horse around and galloped off, leaving his confused companions to follow. The sheriff and judge stayed until they were well out of sight. You all right, Miss Monroe? Sheriff Watson asked. I'm fine, Clara said, though now that the danger had passed, she was starting to shake. That was brave what you did. Stupid maybe, but brave. Sometimes they're the same thing, Clara replied. After the lawmen left, promising to keep an eye on Morrison, Clara found herself standing in the yard with Silas, Carl, and Joe. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her feeling hollow and strange. Well, Joe said, breaking the silence. That was something. Never seen a woman handle a shotgun like that, Carl added admiringly. Where'd you learn to shoot? My father, Clara said. He said a woman alone should know how to protect herself. Smart man, Carl said. Silas, you've got yourself a keeper here. I know, Silas said quietly, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. After the neighbors left with promises to check in tomorrow. Clara and Silas were alone. She was still holding the shotgun, her knuckles white around the stock. You can put it down now, Silas said gently. It's over. Clara set the gun aside carefully, and suddenly her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Silas caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. You could have been killed, he said roughly. When you came out that door, my heart stopped. I couldn't let them hurt you, Clara said into his shirt. I couldn't stand by and watch. That's my job, protecting you. Clara pulled back to look at him. No, we protect each other. That's what partners do. Something shifted in Silas's expression, a wall coming down that had been there since she'd met him. Partners, he repeated. Yes. He kissed her, then not gentle like before, but desperate, as if he was trying to convince himself she was real and alive and there. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Marry me, he said suddenly. What? Marry me. Not someday when you're ready, not after a proper courtship. Now, tomorrow, as soon as Judge Morgan can perform the ceremony. Silas, I know it's fast. I know you wanted time. But Clara, when you walked out that door with that shotgun ready to fight for us, I realized something. Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time being careful. I love you. You love me. Everything else is just details. Clara's mind was spinning. It was too fast. She'd only been here 2 months. She'd sworn she wouldn't rush into anything again. But then she thought about how she'd felt when those riders appeared, the terror that something might happen to Silas. She thought about how natural it felt to call this place home, how right it felt to stand beside him. I don't have a wedding dress, she said, which wasn't really an answer, but somehow was. Wear your blue one, Silas said, the one from that first day. That dress has terrible memories. Then let's make new ones. Clara looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt or deception, but all she saw was love, steady and sure as the mountains. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, tomorrow if Judge Morgan's available. Silas let out a breath she didn't know he'd been holding and pulled her close again. You won't regret this. I know, Clara said, and surprisingly, she did know. This wasn't like with Albert, built on fantasy and pretty words. This was built on shared meals and comfortable silences, on protection offered and accepted, on daily kindness and quiet strength. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, planning their simple wedding. There would be no grand ceremony, no elaborate reception, just them, a few witnesses, and promises made before God and man. Are you sure? Silas asked one more time as the stars began to appear. I've never been more sure of anything, Clara replied. Duke came padding over, settling at their feet with a contented sigh. Inside the house, dinner was cooking a stew Clara had started before the confrontation, filling the air with the smell of home. Her garden was thriving, green shoots reaching toward the sky. Everything about this place, this life, this man beside her felt right in a way nothing ever had before. "I need to tell you something," Silas said suddenly. "About the war. About what I did." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. If we're to be married, you should know." He took a breath. "I was at Antietam. Bloodiest day in American history, they say. I killed boys younger than I was, shot them down because they wore a different color uniform. One of them, he couldn't have been more than 16. He was crying for his mother when he died." Clara took his hand, feeling the weight of his confession. "After that day, something in me broke," Silas continued. "Or maybe it finally fixed itself, I don't know. But I couldn't see the point in fighting anymore. All those boys dying, and for what? So I finished my service, but my heart wasn't in it. When I came home, everyone called me a hero. But I knew what I really was, a killer who'd been lucky enough to survive." "You were a soldier," Clara said gently. "You did what you had to do." "Maybe, but it changed me. Made me harder, quieter. Margaret saw it right away. Said I wasn't the same man who'd left. She was right. And you think I should know this because sometimes I have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back there. Sometimes I go quiet for no reason you'll be able to see. I want you to know what you're getting into." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, "We all have our ghosts, Silas. Mine wear the face of a man who humiliated me for sport. Yours wear uniforms and carry rifles, but they're just ghosts. They only have the power we give them. You make it sound simple. Not simple, but manageable. Together." Silas squeezed her hand. "How did you get so wise?" "Heartbreak is educational," Clara said dryly, then added more seriously, "but so is love. Real love. The kind that sees all the broken pieces and chooses to stay anyway." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, a new beginning. But tonight, they had the quiet certainty of two people who'd found each other against all odds. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating. Clara woke in her room, her last morning waking alone, she realized, with a flutter of anticipation and nervousness. She could hear Silas moving around the kitchen, probably attempting to make breakfast again. She dressed carefully in the blue dress, the one she'd worn that terrible day at the train station. But as she smoothed the fabric, she found the memory had lost its sting. Today would overwrite that humiliation with joy. Martha Patterson arrived early, bearing a bouquet of wildflowers and a knowing smile. "Heard there's to be a wedding." "News travels fast," Clara said, "especially good news." "About time that man made an honest woman of you," Martha said with a wink. "Though from what I hear, you did a fine job of defending your own honor yesterday." "You heard about that." "Honey, everyone's heard about it. You're the talk of the town, the woman who faced down Albert Morrison with a shotgun and sent him running. There's more than a few women in town who wish they had your courage." Martha helped Clara with her hair, pinning it up with the wildflowers woven through. "You look beautiful," she said when they were done. "Glowing." "I'm happy," Clara said simply. "Truly happy." "It shows." The ceremony was held in the small church in town, with Judge Morgan officiating since the regular preacher was visiting settlements further west. Carl, Joe, and Ben stood as witnesses along with Martha, and surprisingly Mrs. Morgan, who'd taken a liking to Clara. When Silas saw Clara walk into the church in that blue dress, wildflowers in her hair, his expression made every moment of heartbreak worth it. He looked at her like she was a miracle, something precious and unexpected and perfect. The ceremony was simple. They spoke traditional vows, though Clara could see Silas wanting to say more. When Judge Morgan pronounced them man and wife, and Silas kissed her gentle and reverent Clara, felt something settle into place in her chest, a rightness, a completion. Afterward, there was a small reception at Martha's store. She'd prepared a cake, and some of the townswomen had brought food. Even some of the men who'd witnessed the confrontation with Albert came to offer congratulations. "Never thought I'd see Silas Rowe married," Ben said, pumping Silas's hand enthusiastically. But if anyone could capture him, it'd be a woman brave enough to face down 6 armed men with a shotgun. It was 5 men, Clara corrected, and 1 coward. That got a laugh from everyone. As the afternoon wore on, Clara noticed how the townspeople's attitude toward her had shifted. She was no longer the woman who'd been fooled by Albert Morrison. She was the woman who'd stood her ground, who'd defended her home, who'd won the heart of one of the most respected ranchers in the area. Late in the afternoon, as Clara was helping Martha clean up, a young woman approached her hesitantly. Clara recognized her as one of the saloon girls, someone respectable women weren't supposed to acknowledge. Mrs. Rowe, the girl corrected herself. I just wanted to say, what you did yesterday, standing up to those men, it gave some of us hope that we don't always have to be victims. None of us have to be victims, Clara said firmly. Sometimes we just need to remember we have the right to fight back. The girl nodded and slipped away, but Clara saw her standing a little straighter as she left. As evening approached, Silas appeared at Clara's elbow. Ready to go home, Mrs. Rowe. Mrs. Rowe. The name sent a thrill through her, not because it meant she belonged to someone, but because it meant she belonged somewhere. She had a place, a purpose, a partner. Yes, she said, let's go home. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but charged with anticipation. This wasn't like her imagined wedding night with Albert would have been all nerves and expectations and performances. This was Silas, who'd seen her at her worst and still chose her. There was nervousness, yes, but also a deep comfort. When they reached the ranch, Silas helped her down from the wagon, holding her a moment longer than necessary. No regrets? He asked. None, Clara assured him. Duke greeted them enthusiastically, as if he knew something momentous had happened. The house looked different somehow, not physically, but in meaning. It was truly their home now, not just a place where Clara was staying. That evening, as Clara prepared dinner their first, as husband and wife, Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking about how Albert Morrison actually did me a favor, Clara said, leaning back against him. If his letters had been real, if he'd been the man he pretended to be, I would have married him and never known what real love looked like. What does it look like? Clara turned in his arms to face him. It looks like burnt biscuits and mended socks, like someone teaching you to shoot and reading Shakespeare in a rough voice, like standing together against the world and knowing you'll never stand alone again. That's a good look, Silas said softly. The best, Clara agreed. Later, as they sat by the fire, Clara in the chair that had become hers and Silas in his, but their hands linked across the small space between them, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation at the train station felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who'd stepped off that train full of desperate hope and romantic dreams was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned the difference between pretty words and true worth. Read to me, she asked Silas. He picked up the Shakespeare volume, but instead of opening it, he looked at her. I'd rather talk about our future, our plans. What kind of plans? The kind where we expand the ranch, bring in more cattle, maybe build another room or 2 on the house for eventual additions. Clara felt herself blush. Children? If we're blessed with them, though I'm already blessed just having you here. Silas Rowe, that was almost poetry. Must be all that Shakespeare rubbing off on me, he said with a grin. They talked late into the night about practical things, the ranch, the garden, the future, but underneath ran a current of joy of 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to build something lasting. When they finally retired, Clara paused at the doorway of what was now their room. I love you, she said. I want you to know that this isn't gratitude or proximity or lack of options. I love you for who you are, the man who offered shelter to a stranger who stands up for what's right, who reads poetry and mucks stalls with equal dedication. And I love you, Silas replied, for your courage, your kindness, your ability to find hope even after it's been shattered, for making this empty house a home, for choosing to stay when you could have run. That night as Clara lay in her husband's arms, listening to his heartbeat and the familiar sounds of the ranch at night, she thought about the letter she would write tomorrow, not to send, but to keep. A letter to her future self, to her potential children, about how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the door to the best thing. She would write about Albert Morrison's cruelty and how it led her to Silas's kindness, about how humiliation became strength, how desperation became determination, about how a false promise of love had led to the real thing. But mostly she would write about how love, real love, wasn't found in grand gestures or perfect words. It was built in daily choices, small kindnesses, and the brave decision to trust again after trust had been shattered. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Duke answered with a bark from his spot on the porch. Silas stirred slightly, pulling Clara closer in his sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, running a ranch always did. There would be hard times ahead, she knew, droughts and harsh winters, sickness and loss. But there would also be spring gardens and autumn harvests, children's laughter, and quiet evenings by the fire. There would be a life built on truth instead of lies, on steady love instead of false promises. Clara closed her eyes, feeling more at peace than she ever had. She'd traveled across the country seeking a fairy tale and had found something better, a real partnership with a good man, a home she'd helped create, and a love that had grown not from pretty words, but from shared struggles and mutual respect. The woman who'd stepped off that train in a blue dress full of hope and dreams had been broken. But from those pieces, someone stronger had emerged. Someone who could face down 6 armed men with a shotgun, who could choose love despite betrayal, who could build a future on the ashes of a shattered past. As sleep finally took her, Clara's last thought was of her garden of the seeds she'd planted that were even now pushing through the dark soil toward the light. Growth was slow, sometimes invisible, but it was happening. Just like her love for Silas, just like her new life, it was growing stronger every day. Roots deep and branches reaching toward the sky. The first year of their marriage passed like a dream Clara never wanted to wake from. Summer brought an abundance from her garden that she preserved for winter, working alongside Silas to put up beans and tomatoes to store potatoes and onions in the root cellar. They worked from dawn to dusk, but the labor felt light when shared, when punctuated by stolen kisses and quiet laughter. By autumn, Clara knew she was carrying their first child. She told Silas on a golden September evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. The wonder that crossed his face was something she would treasure forever. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and she felt him tremble slightly. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Terrified, amazed, grateful Clara, you've given me everything I never dared hope for." The pregnancy progressed well through the fall and winter. Silas became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a tea kettle, until Clara had to firmly remind him that ranch women had been having babies while working since the territory was settled. Martha Patterson became a frequent visitor, sharing wisdom from her own 4 pregnancies and bringing tiny clothes she'd saved. The women of Red Bluff, even those who'd initially gossiped about Clara's circumstances, rallied around her with the solidarity that frontier life demanded. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, and Clara's belly rounded with promise of its own. She still worked, cooking, mending, tending her garden with Silas's help, but she moved more slowly, more carefully. It was on a warm April morning that Clara felt the first pains. She was hanging laundry when the cramping started, low and insistent. She'd been having false pains for weeks, but something about these felt different, deeper, more purposeful. "Silas," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. He was at her side in moments, reading her face with the intuition that came from a year of marriage. "Is it time?" "I think so." His face paled slightly, but his hands were steady as he helped her inside. "I'll ride for Mrs. Patterson and the midwife." "Don't leave me," Clara gasped as another pain rolled through her. "I won't. Ben's in the far pasture. I'll send him." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and determination. Martha arrived with the midwife, a competent woman named Sarah Johnson, who delivered half the babies in the county. They took charge, sending Silas to boil water and gather clean linens, giving him something to do with his nervous energy. Clara had thought she knew about pain, the emotional agony of Albert's betrayal, the fear when those men had come to the ranch. But this was different, primal, and overwhelming. She gripped Martha's hand and tried to be brave, but when the pains peaked, she screamed despite herself. That's it, honey, Martha soothed. Don't hold back. Scream if you need to. Through the bedroom door, Clara could hear Silas pacing, could imagine his face tight with worry. Part of her wanted him there, but tradition dictated that birthing was women's work. The labor stretched through the day and into evening. Clara was exhausted, drenched with sweat, beginning to fear something was wrong when Sarah announced with satisfaction, "I can see the head. One more big push, Clara." With the last of her strength, Clara bore down, and suddenly the room filled with the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard their baby's first cry. "It's a girl," Sarah announced, cleaning the baby quickly before placing her on Clara's chest. "A healthy, perfect girl." Clara looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched with indignation at being forced into the world, and felt her heart expand beyond what she'd thought possible. This little person, this perfect combination of her and Silas, was theirs to protect and raise and love. "Can my husband come in?" she asked. Never taking her eyes off the baby, Martha opened the door and Silas nearly fell into the room in his haste. He stopped short at the sight of Clara holding their daughter, his expression one of awe and terror and love all mixed together. "Come meet your daughter," Clara said softly. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he sat on the edge of the bed and Clara placed the baby in his arms, his hands, those strong, capable hands that could rope a calf or shoot a rifle with steady precision, trembled. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's perfect," Clara said, leaning against his shoulder. "What should we call her?" They'd discussed names for months, but looking at their daughter, only one seemed right. "Hope," Silas said. "Hope Margaret Rowe." Margaret for his mother. Hope for what had brought them together, and what their daughter represented: the future, the promise of all good things to come. That night, after Martha and Sarah had left with promises to check on them tomorrow, Clara lay in bed with Hope nestled between her and Silas. The baby made small, snuffling sounds, her tiny fist wrapped around Silas's finger. "I never imagined this," Silas said quietly. "When I was building this place, living alone all those years, I never let myself imagine having a family. It seemed like asking for too much. And now I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream, that you'll be gone. Hope will be gone, and I'll be alone again." Clara reached across their daughter to touch his face. "We're not going anywhere. We're your family, Silas. Forever." The early weeks of Hope's life passed in a blur of feeding and changing and marveling at every tiny expression, every small sound. Silas proved to be a devoted father, walking the floors with Hope when she was fussy, singing to her in his rough voice that somehow always soothed her. Clara recovered slowly, but well grateful for her strong constitution and Martha's practical care. By the time Hope was a month old, Clara was back to most of her regular duties, though now with a baby tied to her chest in a sling Martha had shown her how to make. It was during this peaceful time that Albert Morrison made his final appearance in their lives. Clara was alone at the ranch with Hope. Silas had gone to town for supplies when she heard a horse approaching. She looked out the window expecting to see a neighbor, and her blood ran cold. Albert sat on his horse at the edge of their property, just watching the house. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, his clothes shabby. The months since their confrontation had not been kind to him. Clara heard he'd been drinking heavily, gambling, alienating even his former friends with his increasingly erratic behavior. Clara checked that the shotgun was loaded, and within reach, then stepped onto the porch, Hope secure against her chest. "You're not welcome here, Albert." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound, nothing like his former confident cruelty. "Just wanted to see what I gave up, what I threw away for a $20 bet." "You didn't give up anything. You never had anything to give up. What Silas and I have built, you're incapable of building because it requires honesty and genuine feeling." "I could have made you happy," he said, and for the first time Clara heard something like regret in his voice. "If I'd really tried, if the letters had been real." "But they weren't real, and you're not capable of making anyone happy, including yourself." Albert's gaze dropped to Hope, visible in her sling. "A baby. You have a baby." "Yes." "Should have been mine," he said bitterly. "No," Clara said firmly. "She was always meant to be Silas's, just like I was always meant to find my way to him, even if it was through your cruelty." Something in her words seemed to break through Albert's self-pity. He really looked at her then, standing strong and confident on the porch of her home, a baby at her breast, a wedding ring on her finger, everything he'd mocked her for wanting. "I ruined my life," he said, and it wasn't directed at her, but at himself. "That day at the station, I had a choice. I could have honored those letters, tried to be the man I pretended to be. Instead, I chose the joke, the laughter of men who don't even speak to me anymore." "Yes," Clara said simply. "You did choose that." "I'm leaving," Albert said. "California, maybe Oregon, somewhere I can start over." "Good." He turned his horse to go, then looked back one more time. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth now, I'm sorry." Clara watched him ride away, and she knew with certainty that she would never see him again. Later they would hear that he'd indeed gone west, disappeared into the vast territories where men could reinvent themselves. She hoped he found redemption, or at least peace, but she wouldn't waste another thought on him. When Silas returned from town, she told him about Albert's visit. His jaw tightened, but when she assured him it had been peaceful, final, he relaxed. "He's gone for good?" Silas asked. "Yes. I think he finally understood what he lost, not me, but the chance to be a better man." Silas pulled her close, careful of hope between them. "His loss was my gain." "Our gain, Tom," Clara corrected and kissed him. The seasons turned as seasons do. Hope grew from a tiny infant to a babbling baby to a toddling child who followed Duke around with determination, much to the dog's patient resignation. She had Silas's steady temperament and Clara's bright curiosity, and she wrapped everyone who met her around her tiny fingers. When Hope was 2, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, leaving her exhausted and sick for the first months. Silas took on more of the household duties without complaint, and Martha sent her eldest daughter Rose to help during the days. Thomas Silas Rowe was born on a cold December night with snow falling thick outside. His birth was faster than Hope's, but no less miraculous. When Silas held his son for the first time, Clara saw tears on his weathered cheeks. "A son," he said wonderingly. "Someone to pass the ranch to teach everything I know." "And a daughter to teach as well," Clara reminded him. "Hope's already better with the chickens than I am." Their family was complete, though the house that had once seemed too empty for one man now burst with life and noise. Silas built in addition 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen with help from their neighbors. The same men who'd once gossiped about Clara's arrival now treated her as one of their own, their wives exchanging recipes and child-rearing advice with her at church socials. 5 years passed. 7. 10. The children grew strong and bright. Hope showed an aptitude for her letters and numbers that suggested she might follow her grandmother's path as a teacher. Little Tom, as they called him, was his father through and through, quiet, steady, already able to calm a spooked horse by age 8. It was on their 10th wedding anniversary that Clara stood in her garden, now expanded to 3 times its original size, and marveled at the life she'd built. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, the beans climbing their poles toward the sky, the corn standing tall and proud. Hope was helping her pick vegetables for dinner while Tom and Silas worked on repairing a fence visible in the distance. "Mama," Hope said, "tell me again about how you met Papa." It was her favorite story, though Clara had edited it for young ears, focusing on Silas's kindness rather than Albert's cruelty. "Well," Clara began, "I came to Montana looking for one thing and found something better. Papa." "That's right. Your papa saw me when I was sad and scared, and he offered to help without asking for anything in return. Because that's what good people do," Hope recited, having heard this moral many times. "Exactly." Martha Patterson came by that afternoon with a cake she'd made for their anniversary. She'd grown stouter with age, but no less energetic, still running her store with an iron fist and a kind heart. 10 years, she marveled, watching the children play in the yard. "Seems like yesterday you were standing in my store scared, but determined to make a new life." "It was yesterday and a lifetime ago, both," Clara said. That evening after the children were asleep, Clara and Silas sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before. The view hadn't changed much. The mountains still rose purple in the distance, the grass still waved in the wind, but everything else had. Do you ever think about how different life might have been? Silas asked. If Morrison's letters had been real, if you'd married him instead. Clara considered it. I'd be miserable, she said with certainty. Even if he'd honored his proposal, he wasn't capable of real love, real partnership. I would have had a house but not a home, a husband but not a partner. And me? You'd still be alone reading Shakespeare to Duke. They laughed at the image, but then Silas grew serious. You saved me, Clara. I'd convinced myself I was content alone, but I was just existing. You brought me back to life. We saved each other, Clara corrected. As if to punctuate the moment, they heard giggles from inside. The children were supposed to be sleeping, but were clearly still awake, probably telling stories in the dark. Should we check on them? Silas asked. Let them be, Clara said. Childhood is short enough. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge. Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 13 years ago, desperate, hopeful, naive. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, weathered by sun and wind and life itself. But sometimes in quiet moments like this, Clara could feel that younger self inside her, still marveling at the life she'd built from the ashes of humiliation. A loving husband, beautiful children, a productive ranch, a place in the community, everything she'd dreamed of and more. The scar of Albert's betrayal had never fully disappeared, but it had faded to insignificance next to the joy of her daily life. She rarely thought of him anymore, except as a reminder of how wrong she could have been, how different her life might have been if his cruelty hadn't driven her into Silas's kindness. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, noting her contemplative mood. About how the worst day of my life led to all the best days that followed. That's very philosophical for a ranch wife. Clara laughed. Must be all that Shakespeare you read to me. Speaking of which, Silas went inside and returned with the worn volume that had become as much a part of their story as anything else. But instead of reading, he set it aside and pulled out something else, a letter. What's this? Clara asked. Open it. Inside was a deed to 20 acres of adjoining land purchased in her name. Silas, we can't afford. We can and we did. It's yours, Clara. Your land in your name. You'll never be without a home again, no matter what happens. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he still understood her deepest fear, being left with nothing, nowhere to go. Nothing will happen to you, she said. God willing, but if it does, you and the children will be secure. That land has good water, fertile soil. You could build a life there if you needed to. Clara kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Thank you. Not for the land, but for understanding why I might need it. I know you, Clara Rowe. Every fear, every hope, every dream, just like you know mine. A cry from inside interrupted them, Tom having a nightmare from the sound of it. Clara rose to go to him, but Silas stopped her. I'll go. You enjoy the evening. She watched him go inside, heard his low voice soothing their son, and felt a wave of contentment so strong it was almost overwhelming. This was happiness, not the grand sweeping emotion she'd imagined as a girl, but something deeper, richer. It was built on countless small moments, daily choices to love and support each other, shared struggles and quiet victories. When Silas returned reporting that Tom was back asleep, Clara stood and held out her hand. Dance with me, she said. There's no music. There's always music if you listen. And there was the wind through the grass, the distant howl of coyotes, the creak of the porch boards under their feet. They danced slowly, awkwardly. Two people who'd never learned proper steps, but who moved together with the synchronization of long partnership. I love you, Clara said against his chest. More than on our wedding day, more than yesterday, probably less than tomorrow. That's a lot of love, Silas said, his voice rumbling through his chest. It's exactly the right amount. As they swayed together under the vast Montana sky, Clara thought about the letter she'd never written, but had composed 1,000 times in her head, the one to that desperate girl on the train platform. She would tell her, be brave. The humiliation will pass, but the strength you gain from surviving it won't. That man's cruelty is not your worth. Your worth is in your resilience, your capacity to trust again after betrayal. your ability to build something beautiful from broken pieces. She would tell her, the love you're looking for exists, but it won't come in the package you expect. It won't be the handsome stranger with pretty words, but the quiet man with work-rough hands who offers shelter without expecting payment. It will grow slowly, like a garden requiring daily tending but yielding a harvest beyond imagining. She would tell her, you will have children who inherit your strength and your husband's steadiness. You will have a home that's truly yours. Friends who respect you, a life of purpose and meaning. The train station disaster will become just a story you tell, edited for young ears about how sometimes the worst detours lead to the best destinations. But mostly she would tell her, hold on, hope is coming in all its forms. The sound of horses approaching broke their reverie. Multiple horses riding fast. Clara felt a flutter of old fear, but Silas was calm. That'll be Ben and the others, he said. Forgot to mention they wanted to come by tonight. Bring their congratulations for our anniversary. Indeed, their neighbors appeared, Ben and Carl and Joe, along with their wives and children. They brought food and music, Carl having brought his fiddle. Soon the quiet evening became an impromptu celebration with children running through the yard and adults dancing to Carl's energetic playing. Hope showed off her reading to the other children. Tom demonstrated his rope skills and Duke wandered from person to person collecting scraps and pats. Clara moved through it all like a queen of her small domain, making sure everyone had food and drink, accepting congratulations and compliments with grace. At one point, she found herself standing with the other wives, watching their husbands attempt some kind of jig that had them all laughing. You did good, Clara, Ben's wife Sarah said, taming Silas Rowe. We all thought he'd die a bachelor. I didn't tame him, Clara said. I just gave him a reason to let someone in. Same thing, Sarah said with a wink. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Ben pulled Clara aside. Want you to know, he said quietly, we all admire what you've built here. You and Silas both, but especially you. Takes a special kind of courage to start over the way you did. I had help, Clara said. Sure, but you had to accept it. That takes courage, too. After everyone left, the family worked together to clean up even little Tom carrying dishes inside with careful concentration. It was past the children's bedtime, but Clara didn't have the heart to rush them. These moments of family togetherness were worth more than a rigid schedule. Finally, though, the children were tucked in, prayers said goodnights exchanged. Clara looked in on them one more time before retiring Hope, with a book still clutched in her hands. Tom curled up with the wooden horse Silas had carved for him. In their own room, as Clara brushed out her hair, still auburn, though now streaked with silver, Silas watched her from the bed. What? She asked, catching his expression in the mirror. Just thinking how beautiful you are. I'm getting old, Silas. We both are. No, he said. We're getting seasoned, like good wood getting stronger and more beautiful with age. Clara laughed. Only you would compare your wife to lumber. It's a compliment. She joined him in bed, curling into his warmth as she had for 10 years now. Outside, a storm was building. She could hear the distant rumble of thunder, see the occasional flash of lightning through the curtains. Storm coming, Silas said. Let it come, Clara replied. We've weathered worse. And they had. Droughts that threatened the ranch winters, that killed cattle sickness, that had nearly taken Tom when he was 3. They'd faced it all together, and they were still here, still strong, still choosing each other every day. Tell me, Clara said, as rain began to patter against the windows, if you could go back, would you change anything? Silas was quiet for a moment. I'd have been at that train station for a different reason. I'd have been the one meeting you, the one who'd written those letters, but real ones. I'd have saved you that humiliation. But then I wouldn't have known, Clara said. I wouldn't have known how strong I could be, how much kindness could mean, how love could grow from friendship and respect rather than grand romance. I wouldn't have known the difference between pretty words and true worth. You could have learned it easier ways. Maybe, but I might not have valued it as much. She turned to face him in the dark. That pain made me who I am, Silas. It brought me to you, but more than that, it taught me to recognize real love when I found it. I wouldn't change that. The storm grew stronger, rain lashing the windows, thunder shaking the house. But inside they were warm and safe and together. Clara thought she heard one of the children call out, but before either parent could rise, they heard footsteps. Hope going to comfort her brother. She's going to be a wonderful mother someday, Clara said. Like her own mother, Silas replied. They lay together listening to the storm, and Clara's mind drifted to all the storms they'd weathered, literal and figurative. Each one had tested them, but also strengthened them, like the wind strengthening a tree by forcing its roots deeper. I have something for you, Silas said suddenly. For our anniversary. You already gave me the land. This is different. He lit the lamp and pulled something from beneath the bed, a leather-bound journal, pristine and beautiful. What's this for? Your story, Silas said. You should write it down, all of it. So Hope and Tom know where they came from, what their mother overcame. So other women who might be where you were can know it gets better. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth leather. I wouldn't know how to start. Start with the truth, Silas said. Start with a woman stepping off a train in a blue dress, thinking her life was beginning when really it was just about to fall apart and be rebuilt stronger. Would you help me remember the details with me? Everyone, he promised. They talked through the night as the storm raged, remembering laughing, sometimes crying. They talked about Albert's cruelty and Silas's kindness, about Lucy Harrison, and her escape, about Hope's birth and Tom's terrible bout with fever, about gardens planted and harvests gathered. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Clara had filled the first pages of the journal with notes, with memories, with the skeleton of a story that was both hers and universal, a story of betrayal and redemption, of humiliation and triumph, of a love built not on deception but on daily truth. Silas had fallen asleep in his chair and Clara covered him with a blanket, kissing his forehead gently. She stepped onto the porch to watch the sunrise, her journal clutched to her chest. The ranch spread before her in the early light, the garden already showing new growth from the rain, the pastures green and lush, the buildings they'd built and maintained with their own hands. It was a modest empire, but it was theirs earned through work and patience and trust. Duke padded over to stand beside her, leaning his graying muzzle against her leg. In the distance, she could see the neighbors' smoke rising from their chimneys, the community that had become her extended family. Mama? Hope appeared in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes. What are you doing? Watching our world wake up, Clara said, pulling her daughter close. Is it a good world? Clara thought about the question seriously. It was a world that could be cruel, where men like Albert Morrison could destroy lives for sport, but it was also a world where men like Silas Rowe would offer shelter to strangers, where women like Martha Patterson would stand up for what was right, where neighbors would rally around those in need. Yes, she said finally, it's a very good world. Not perfect, but good. Will you tell me a story? Hope asked. What kind of story? A true one, about brave people. Clara smiled, opening her journal to the first page. Once upon a time, she began, there was a woman who thought she knew what love looked like. She was wrong, but that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. As she told the story, her story, their story, the sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the storm clouds. Tom emerged, drawn by his mother's voice, and settled on her other side. Even Silas woke and came to stand behind them, his hands on Clara's shoulders. And Clara realized that this moment, this family, this life was what she'd been traveling toward on that long-ago train. Not to Albert Morrison and his false promises, but through them to something real and lasting and worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. The woman in the blue dress was gone, replaced by someone stronger and wiser. But Clara would never forget her, that hopeful girl who'd risked everything on a dream. She'd honor her by living well, by loving fully, by teaching her children that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations.